Imagine pouring your heart, your soul, and even your life into fighting for a promise.
Right.
Like dedicating yourself to this collective dream of freedom, sacrificing literally everything you have, your youth, your safety, your family, only to wake up decades later, look around and wonder, where did we go wrong?
Yeah, I mean, it is a devastating question.
It
And
really
when a
is.
whole generation starts asking it, it completely shatters how you understand the history of a nation.
Exactly. And that question is basically the beating heart of today's deep dive.
Absolutely.
We're exploring Zimbabwe's incredibly complex journey. Specifically, we're looking at the massive gap between the soaring unified hopes of its liberation struggle and, well, its current political and social realities.
And to do this, we are pulling insights from two intensely passionate panel discussions from the YouTube channel Champions Network TV.
Right. One is titled Takarasika, papi seNyika, which essentially asks, where did we lose our way as a nation? And the other is Rwendo Renika Kufa Mutariro Koendo Mukutambudzika, which translates to the journey of a country from hope to suffering.
And these panels, they offer this really fascinating raw look at how history is processed by the people who actually lived it.
Yeah, it's not academic.
Exactly. They aren't looking at dates in a textbook. They are analyzing their own lived reality.
But before we get too deep, I want to set some really clear guardrails for you as you listen.
Very important, yeah.
These sources contain some highly charged political critiques regarding factions like ZANU, ZAPU, ZIPRA, and ZANA.
Oh, definitely.
So we need to make it explicitly clear that in this deep dive, we are not taking any political sides. We aren't endorsing any of these specific viewpoints.
Right. Our mission today is just to strictly unpack the passionate perspectives and the historical analysis presented by the speakers in the source material.
Exactly. We want to extract the broader lessons from these sources about, state building, the fragility of a social contract, and the incredibly long shadow of inherited trauma.
And to really grasp those lessons, we have to start by clarifying who those factions were.
Right, because it sets the stage for everything.
Exactly. So during the liberation struggle spanning the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the fight against colonial rule wasn't just one single unified army.
Right.
You had ZAPU, the Zimbabwe African People's Union, and its military wing, ZIPRA. And then you had ZANU, the Zimbabwe African National Union, with its military wing, ZANA-LA.
So different groups entirely.
Yeah, distinct liberation armies with different political affiliations and regional bases. They were all ostensibly fighting for the same overarching goal, but they were often plagued by severe internal friction.
But despite that friction, there was this foundational understanding that unified the movement.
Yes, the social contract.
Right. The panels detail this implicit, almost sacred agreement among the people they call the sons and daughters of the soil. It was basically a massive national social contract.
And the masses, like the ordinary citizens in the rural areas, they were the absolute backbone of the guerrilla fighters.
They really were.
The war just could not have been fought without them. I mean, they provided the food rations, they smuggled the intelligence, they hid fighters from colonial forces, often at unimaginable risk to their own lives.
Wow.
And they did this with a very specific shared expectation. They believed that once the war was won, the spoils of that victory, the prosperity, and most importantly, their ancestral land would be shared among everyone who sacrificed.
Thinking about how this social contract was discussed in the sources, it reminds me of like a high-stakes startup company.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. Imagine you're at this startup and the early employees sacrifice absolutely everything. They're sleeping under their desks, working 80-hour weeks without pay, all for this shared vision.
Right, betting on the future.
Exactly. But then when the company finally goes public and makes billions, only a tiny handful of founders get the massive payout.
Ouch.
Yeah, and the rest of the people who literally built the thing from scratch are just left with absolutely nothing.
That is a painfully accurate analogy for the betrayal these panels are unpacking.
It's just so stark.
It is. The post-independence reality became this bitter irony. The speakers highlight how the new political elites, the leaders of the liberation movements, suddenly found themselves enjoying a life of incredible luxury.
Right.
They use the specific vivid image of swimming pools and highly lucrative government contracts just being passed around a small inner circle.
All while the rural populations, the ones who kept them alive in the bush, are basically forgotten.
Exactly. The ordinary people and even many of the rank-and-file veterans who actually fought the war, just remain mired in deep poverty.
It's a massive betrayal.
The panels frame this not just as an economic issue, but as a profound moral betrayal of the initial aspirations of the struggle. The early startup employees got totally shut out.
And the biggest part of that missing payout, like the absolute core grievance that fueled the entire war, was the land itself.
Yes, that was the primary objective. During colonial rule, indigenous people had been systematically pushed off their fertile ancestral lands and forced into these harsh, arid areas.
Right, the sources mentioned specific places, didn't they?
They did. They specifically mentioned places like Cholocho, Lupain, and Nkai.
Okay.
And they refer to these areas as Magaswini, which roughly translates to the wilderness.
The wilderness, wow.
Yeah, being forced into the wilderness was the driving indignity. The whole promise of the war was bringing the people out of the wilderness and returning their soil.
Okay, but wait, hold on. I need to push back on this timeline for a second.
Sure.
If getting the land back was the entire point of the war, like the core grievance, why wasn't it redistributed immediately after the 1980 independence?
It's a great question.
I mean, you win the war in 1980, you take the land back in 1980. Why on earth would they wait?
To understand that delay, you have to look at how the war actually ended. It didn't end with a total military surrender. It ended at a negotiating table in London, which resulted in the Lancaster House Agreement.
Right.
And Lord Soames, a British politician, was sent down to serve as the transitional governor. The British government and the international mediators were just terrified that an immediate forced redistribution of white-owned commercial farms would completely collapse the agricultural economy overnight.
So they essentially forced the hands of the liberation leaders during these negotiations.
Exactly. The message was basically, if you want your independence recognized globally, and if you want the bloodshed to stop right now, you have to sign this constitution that protects existing property rights for a full decade.
A whole decade?
Yes. They legally baked a 10-year delay into the very birth of the nation.
That is wild.
It prevented the new government from compulsory land acquisition. It instituted a willing buyer, willing seller policy.
Which means the very thing they spent decades fighting and dying for was legally kept out of reach. And only if the current owners actually felt like selling it back to them.
Right. And you can imagine the psychological impact of that. It meant the fundamental grievance of the war remained totally unaddressed for 10 years.
That's a recipe for disaster.
It created an intense societal pressure cooker. You have this population promised a return from the wilderness, and suddenly the new leaders are telling them, well, the law says you have to wait another 10 years.
Which brings up a really critical transition, because that pressure cooker didn't just go away.
No, it didn't.
When you have a massive population realizing their foundational promise is being delayed or broken, the people in charge need a way to manage that frustration.
Right.
Which leads to a really dark theme in these discussions. One of the speakers asks this haunting question, why is Zimbabwe so easy to blood?
It's such a profound question. They're exploring the normalization of political violence.
Right. And when we look at this history, does the source suggest this violence is just a glitch in the post-colonial system? Or was it actually designed as a feature of how power is maintained?
The panels strongly argue that it is a feature. It's a deeply ingrained mechanism of control.
Inherited from the war, right?
Exactly. They trace the roots of this culture of violence straight back to the Liberation War itself. The intense clashes between the different factions, especially Zanel and Zipra, didn't just evaporate.
Right.
The panels discuss how even during the transition, when fighters were in these supposedly peaceful assembly points, violence broke out.
So the guerrilla tactics used against the colonial regime were never unlearned.
Never. They just turned those tactics inward. Instead of fighting an occupier, those methods became tools for political intimidation against their own people.
There's a reference in the discussions to short sleeves, which is just horrifying to even think about.
It is a truly chilling reference. For context on the terror tactics discussed in the panels, short sleeves refers to the brutal physical mutilation of political opponents.
Oh, man.
It literally meant the amputation of a person's hands or arms.
The terrifying logic being you can't cast a ballot against us, and you can't fight back if you don't have hands.
Exactly. It was a horrific method of ensuring absolute control, and the fact that the panels bring this up highlights a devastating shift in the narrative.
From liberation to oppression.
Right. The rhetoric of the struggle was power to the people, but the reality shifted to power through fear.
Because the social contract was broken.
Yes. If the prosperity isn't shared, the state needs a new tool to prevent an uprising. Fear basically became the default language of political dispute.
It's like an autoimmune disease.
How do you mean?
Well, a healthy state intelligence and security apparatus should act as a national immune system, right? It's supposed to protect the entire body, the nation, from external threats.
Right, fighting off destabilization.
Exactly. But here, the immune system has been maliciously reprogrammed. Instead of fighting off external diseases like economic instability, this reprogrammed immune system becomes exclusively obsessed with protecting the brain.
The brain being the leadership.
Right. It dedicates all its resources to defending the leadership, even if the rest of the body, the economy, the infrastructure is actively failing and dying.
That is a perfect analogy for the panel's critique of the institutional control. They draw a very sharp line between what they call true national intelligence and what actually exists, which they term regime security.
So what does that difference look like, practically speaking?
Well, a true national intelligence apparatus focuses on the national interest. The panels give the specific example of protecting the functional currency and the economy.
Because an economic collapse is a threat to the whole body.
Exactly. But instead, they argue the state security apparatus operates largely as a partisan tool. Its primary function isn't to shield the nation, it's to spy on political rivals and protect the ruling party.
Defending the brain while the body starves.
Yes. And when state institutions become partisan tools, the shared national identity fractures. The state becomes a private security force for the elites.
Wow.
But, the discussions don't just focus on the institutional damage, they shift to the human cost, the spiritual toll.
And this is where the history becomes incredibly emotional.
It really does.
The speakers emphasize that the past is quite literally and figuratively unburied.
The historical trauma is treated as this open, festering wound.
There are visceral details in their analysis that just stick with you. They talk about fighters who drowned while crossing the Zambezi River, their bodies never recovered.
Families never knowing what happened to them.
Right. They talk about the young divas, the local collaborators and messengers who risked everything to help the fighters whose sacrifices went completely unrecognized.
Forgotten by the new government.
And perhaps most devastatingly, they talk about the literal shallow graves scattered across the countryside.
Yeah, holding the remains of civilians and fighters killed during internal conflicts.
We have to understand why this matters so deeply, beyond just the historical record.
Well, in many cultures, but particularly in this context, a proper burial is absolutely essential.
It's not just about disposing of remains.
Exactly. It is about honoring the spirit, providing closure to the ancestors, and restoring balance to the community. The panels argue that you cannot simply paper over these massive historical and spiritual traumas with political agreements.
And they specifically point to the 1987 executive changes to illustrate this, right?
They do.
So what exactly were those 1987 changes, and why didn't they work?
So the 1987 changes, often called the Unity Accord, were a political agreement to merge ZNU and ZAPU into a single ruling party.
Okay.
On paper, it was meant to end a horrific period of internal violence, primarily in the Matabeleland and Midlands regions. It did stop the immediate large-scale bloodshed.
But it was just a handshake at the top, wasn't it?
Precisely. It was an executive consolidation of power masked as peace.
Right.
The speakers argue that a handshake in the capital does absolutely nothing to heal the trauma of a mother in a rural village who still doesn't know where her son is buried.
A political agreement doesn't empty a shallow grave.
No, it doesn't, and that's why the speakers in these sources are calling for a spiritual cleansing.
A national reckoning.
Exactly. Their thesis is that a nation cannot truly move forward when families are still haunted by unacknowledged losses. The ghosts of the past are literally holding the country's future hostage.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? Why does a deep dive into the traumas of Zimbabwe matter to someone sitting half a world away?
It matters because this serves as a universal masterclass in the complexities of transitions.
Right.
It shows that winning a struggle, whether that's a revolution or a major election, is only step one.
It's the glamorous part, but just the beginning.
The far harder task is building inclusive institutions and actually honoring the social contract you promised to the people.
We've been exploring these profound ideas through the passionate critiques from the Champions Network TV panels.
Yes, looking through their historical lenses.
And again, without taking any political sides ourselves, we've just been absorbing the lessons of their lived history.
It forces us to question the foundations of any state transitioning from conflict to peace.
Which brings us back to where we started. Imagine pouring your life into a dream, only to wake up to a broken promise.
It's a heavy thought.
It is. And it leaves us with a lingering, provocative question for you to ponder on your own. If a nation's foundation is built on unacknowledged trauma and a broken social contract, can a new generation ever truly rewrite that contract?
Or are they doomed to inherit the ghosts of the past?
Exactly. Are they stuck with those ghosts until a true, incredibly uncomfortable